Okay, fine. Okay, I started the recording. Yeah. So always divided into early stage and your locally advanced stage. So anything beyond 1B2 is your locally advanced state. So now would you like to go ahead and tell us how would you go ahead with the early stage treatment?
Okay, for stage 1A1 without lymphovascular invasion, we can either go for a fertility sparing treatment, that is conization with a negative margin, or a trachelectomy, that is in surgery. Or we can also go for a, if non-fertility sparing, we can go for extrafacial hysterectomy or modified radical hysterectomy with pelvic lymph node dissection. If if the it's 1A1 with LVI, we can go for conization with negative margin plus pelvic lymph node dissection, or we can consider for sentinel lymph node mapping as well. Or modified and in non-fertility sparing, it will be modified radical hysterectomy plus pelvic lymph node dissection. Or we can go for pelvic EBRT plus brachytherapy up from till 70 to 80 gray total. And for further down again, for one till 1B1 1B2, these are the modalities that we can go for. After that, more the stages more than that, we go for chemotherapy. Yeah, that is still the early stage treatment.
Hello.
Hello.
Was it audible?
No, your voice is actually reduced a little.
Sir, for the early stages, stage 1A1 with with and
There's
without
something
lymphomas.
something wrong with your voice. It's not as loud as it was.
And we can hear our own voice.
We can. There's a echo for our own voice.
Sir, is it audible now?
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
fine.
yeah.
Is the echo still there?
No,
No,
it's
it's not
not.
there.
You can continue.
Okay. So for the early stage 1A1 without lymphovascular involvement, we can either go for fertility sparing or non-fertility sparing treatment. In fertility sparing, it will be conization with a negative margin or trachelectomy. And if the fertility is not required, then we can go for extrafacial hysterectomy or modified radical hysterectomy with pelvic lymph node dissection can also be done. This is and if it is 1A1 with lymphovascular invasion or 1A2, then we apart from these modalities, we can also go for pelvic external beam radiation therapy plus brachytherapy. That is 70 to 80 gray total. We will give the dose till that
70 to 80 gray.
70.
total. Second here.
Yeah. We can hear you. We can hear you.
And for stage 1B1, 1B2 also similarly radical trachelectomy plus pelvic lymph node dissection. Or
Wait. So
Yeah.
you would do radical trachelectomy for 1B2?
for fertility sparing, we can 1B1 till 1B1.
Okay. Yeah. So please, 1B2 you have no option for fertility sparing. Okay. Don't confuse.
So that is why it's staged under locally advanced cases.
Yeah.
For
1B.
1B2, it will be radical hysterectomy.
Yeah. Exactly. 1B2 will be radical hysterectomy.
Okay. And whenever you're saying your pelvic lymph node dissection, you have to give the option for para-aortic lymph node sampling as well. Okay, that can be added or it can be avoided also. So just mention, like, have an idea if the examiner asks you, then yeah, even para-aortic lymph node, if it can be sampled, if you have the option, you can definitely go ahead and do it. So everyone got the overview of treatment.
Dr. Vivek, can you mute everyone?
Yeah. So so just to sum up. Yeah. So just to sum up, for 1A1, you've got two options. You can provide fertility sparing or non-fertility options. If it's non-fertility sparing, you go ahead with extrafacial hysterectomy, that is class 1 hysterectomy, or you can even add brachytherapy alone. You've got evidence for that. If it is 1A1 and you require fertility sparing, then you have to look into various factors, especially your presence of LBSI or even your negative margin. Negative margin in such cases is it should be more than or equal to 3 mm. So if without LBSI and with a negative margin of 3 mm, then cold knife conization can be done. However, if there is LBSI present, then you go ahead with cone knife conization, but you add pelvic lymph node dissection as well, because the risk for regional metastasis increases. So these are the two options. Or else, if fertility sparing is warranted in 1A1, then you can even go ahead with radical trachelectomy and add pelvic lymph node dissection. So whenever pelvic lymph node dissection is there, you can give the option of para-aortic lymph node sampling. Then the next point comes is your 1A2. Again, 1A2 will be divided into non-fertility sparing and your fertility sparing. So if it is fertility sparing, then you go ahead with cold knife conization. If it is negative margin, then only you go ahead with cold knife conization, and you add pelvic lymph node dissection. But if the margins are suspicious, or you've got LVSI that is there, so then radical trachelectomy with the pelvic lymph node dissection is your option. Then comes 1B1. So 1B1, you go ahead with radical hysterectomy with the pelvic lymph node dissection or definitive EBRT with brachytherapy. In this case, in 1B1, addition of concurrent chemotherapy is based on the various parameters that are there. So you can add, or you can even avoid concurrent chemotherapy with your radiation. So in tumors less than 2 centimeter in 1B1, you can offer radical trachelectomy with the pelvic lymph node dissection if fertility sparing is warranted. And beyond that, 1B2 and 2A2 to 4A, definitive external beam radiation with brachytherapy and concurrent chemotherapy in the form of cisplatin with 30 to 40 milligram per meter square. That is your dose. So this is the what do you say, the overview that is there. So the dose that is there, if you're using a small volume, if you've got a central primary tumor, you have to boost up to 80 gray, initial dose of 45 to 50 gray with 1.8 to 2 gray per fraction over 5 weeks. You boost up to 80 gray if it is a small volume disease, up to 1B1, and beyond that you have to go up to 85 to 90 gray for large volumes. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Anything else, Dr. Riddhi, would you like to add?
No, I think it was pretty concise. You have discussed about everything. Just the option of radiation in 1A1, like you said, it's brachytherapy only. For 1A2, as per the NCG guideline from TMH, it's NCG, right? Yeah, the NCG guideline. So it would be brachytherapy plus minus external beam RT, and even for 1B1 and 2A1, your option for radiation would be radical RT, EBRT plus brachytherapy. Brachy plus minus external beam RT is only for 1A2. So you can add external beam RT, you can omit it. For 1B1 and 2A1, your option for radiation would be radical RT, which is EBRT plus brachytherapy.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Sir, when do we decide regarding going up to 45 gray or 50 gray?
So that is institutional. Actually, some of the institutes go ahead with 45 gray in 25 fractions. Usually they do it for your early stage disease. And if it's a small volume disease, it's not going into the parametrium, just up to 1B2. So in those cases, they prefer, but there are centers who even for 1B2, they go up to 50 gray. So there is no well-defined parameter. The dose ranges from 45 to 50 gray. You can actually go ahead with anything. Yeah.
This
So
80 gray is the
no, we cannot hear you.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Your voice is very low.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, sir. So this 80 gray is
No, we cannot hear you. We cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So this 80 gray and boost up to 80 gray and 85 gray, this is equivalent dose, right?
Yeah. This is the equivalent
That
dose.
is the LDR equivalent. Yes.
So whenever you're asked, like suppose you've got a 2B case or you've got where you know where it is definitive EBRT. So whenever the examiner asks you, so it will be like you would like to treat. How would you like to treat such a case? Suppose it's a 2B case. Then your answer would be, I would like to go ahead with definitive external beam radiation therapy to the primary as well, and to a dose of 50 gray in 25 fractions, and boost with the dose to the primary as well as the parametrial involvement and the grossly involved lymph nodes. And I would like to boost with the intracavity. First, I would like to assess after the completion of external beam radiation therapy, and then decide my brachytherapy dose, and boost to up to 85 to 90 gray with an LDR equivalent. Again, I need to mute.
That should be assessed only after completion of EBRT or during the EBRT also. Do we interdigitate brachytherapy during the EBRT?
You can see interdigitating brachytherapy is not something which is very standard. It has been tried by institutes and they've said it's non-inferior. But in the exam, you go ahead with what is standard. Okay, so interdigitated brachytherapy is not the the current norm. The interdigitated brachytherapy came into picture just to reduce the overall treatment time, and it has shown to actually have more of toxicity. So the standard is EBRT followed by a boost with brachytherapy. Stick to that. If you say about interdigitated brachytherapy, then your VIVA will go towards your OTTs and your survival in cervical malignancy. So it's better to avoid such controversies. So the best way would be definitive EBRT to a dose of 50 gray to the primary as well as your parametrial involvement of the grossly involved lymph nodes, followed by a boost with the brachytherapy after assessment of EBRT response, and going to a dose of 80 to 85 or 85 to 90 gray according to the stage with the brachytherapy boost. The EBRT would be with the concurrent chemotherapy in the form of cisplatin to a dose of 30 to 40 milligram per meter square. You can safely say 40 milligram if your institute is following that. Then let the examiner ask you what are the other doses that have been tried. So 40 milligram per meter square cisplatin, and that will be the concurrent chemotherapy. Did you get it?
Sir, 1A1 brachytherapy dose when alone brachytherapy is given. What is it?
Can you come again? I did not get you. What was your question?
1A1 brachytherapy dose.
Okay, so you mean when you're using brachytherapy alone?
Yes. Yes, sir, brachytherapy alone.
Anyone would like to answer?
Eight into 5, sir? Not sure.
Yeah, so basically, again, it is the LDR equivalent that you go ahead with, and so 5 gray in 10 fractions, 8 into 5 fractions, all have been tried. You don't actually have something which is very standard. So 40 gray with HDR, it amounts to around 60 gray, 55 to 60 gray with your EBRT equivalent. So that amounts to that. So the LDR, so whenever you answer for 1A1, it will be in the tune of 60 to 70 gray in LDR equivalent. So for 1A1. Okay, it can be 5 gray in 8 fractions, it can be 5 gray in 10 fractions, it could be 7 gray in 7 gray in 7 fractions, or 7 gray in 6 fractions also some of the institutes have done. Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah. So now Dr. Reddy, last time when I was, I'm sorry, I was not there for the screening class. Did you discuss about the management of CIN? Dr. Reddy? Is he there?
Hello? Oh, sorry, I was muted. Didn't see. So yeah, I did not discuss the management of CIN. I would just like to differ. I was talking about this. I wouldn't exactly differ, but I would just like like to confirm this and get back on this point. So I mean, the point A dose as per the ABS guidelines, even for an early disease, would it go down to 60 gray, or would it remain same 80 to 85 gray? Because as much
Yeah,
as I
even I had this doubt, but what the explanation that I was given is 1A1, you actually don't have any significant data that is there. So
yeah that's
even like when I was a JR, when I had this doubt, the answer that was given was this only, that you go up to 60 to 70 gray.
okay. But the main point to remember here is that you would be, whatever dose you're giving, you would be giving it entirely with the ICRT, because the concept is that whenever the reason we need to give EBRT is because we need to increase the dose laterally. ICRT cannot go to properly. It cannot go give enough dose to the pelvic side walls. So that's why you need to add EBRT to give dose to the pelvic side walls, as well as the dose to dose to the lymph nodes. So that is the entire concept of giving EBRT. But but the reason you are doing treating it only with ICRT in 1A1 is because you don't need to give that much dose to the lateral pelvic wall or for the lymph nodes, because it's an early disease. So whatever dose you can give entirely with an ICRT, and you can only consider the dose to the point A as a dose to point A as the factor that would decide the prognosis of the patient, rather than dose to the other lateral structures. That's the basic concept of it.
Sir, brachytherapy in 1A1, is it fertility sparing or non-fertility sparing?
Radiation is never fertility sparing.
Yeah.
Don't confuse us. Okay, radiation is never fertility sparing.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so little bit about CIN. Anyone would like to talk about the Reichert classification? What is CIN 1, CIN 2, and CIN 3? Anyone? Dr. GV is also there. Yeah, tell me.
There's the Bethesda system with the Reichert system. And
Yeah, so Bethesda system is basically for the reporting, and CIN classification into 1, 2, and 3 was given by Reichert.
Okay, so CIN 1 will be mild dysplasia, CIN 2 will be moderate, like that, sir, or should I start total? Okay, so it will start from normal, then inflammatory or atypia, then it will go to squamous atypia or HVV atypia, then mild, moderate, and severe dysplasia, then carcinoma in situ and invasive squamous carcinoma. That is the whole spectrum.
So this is what the confusion is. Okay, you were actually right in when you actually talked about it. So Reichert actually follows, and it gave you the initial system in CIN 1, CIN 2, and CIN 3. So right now we are following the Bethesda system. In Bethesda, you got normal, you got infection or reactive repair. Then you got ascus, that is the atypical squamous cell of unknown significance. Then you got your SIL, which is low or high grade, and then you got your invasive carcinomas. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So the other systems are your Reichert system. You got a Regan system as well as the Papanicolaou system. Yeah. So these are the various systems. Now you've got CIN 1, CIN 2, and CIN 3. CIN 1 is your mild dysplasia. You've got CIN 2, that is moderate, and CIN 3 is your severe or carcinoma in situ. So what is the management of CIN 1 and what is the management of CIN 2 and 3 together? So how will you manage someone else? Dr. Abhishek, would you like to answer how will you manage CIN 1?
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, CIN 1 is around 60% will regress spontaneously, CIN 1 to 3 years. So observation can be done up to 3 years. Only if persists, then we'll have to for treatment. In 2 or 3, if there is a persistent dysplasia, we'll have to go with the colposcopy and biopsy.
Okay, so basically SIN1, you like Dr. Abhishek pointed out, you can go ahead with observation. When do you treat? So treatment, you've got 2 options. If you cannot ensure that the patient is the compliance of follow-up is not going to be there, that is one point. The other thing is if the lesion stays beyond 2 years, then you go ahead and treat. And the third option is when the grade or the size worsens. So these are the 3 criteria where you'll actually go ahead and treat SIN1. In SIN2 and 3, it'll be a good idea if you divide it. Okay, so you say you've got 2 options. You've got ablative options. You've got excisional options. So, Dr. Abhishek, would you like to enumerate the 3 ablative options that are there?
Ablative will be cryotherapy or laser ablations.
Yeah, and one more.
Excisional.
One more ablative, diathermy.
Diathermy.
So what do you mean by diathermy? It is electrocoagulation diathermy. So what does the word diathermy actually mean?
Using heats.
Yeah, so it's electrically induced heat.
Yes.
Yeah, and so the 3 ablative options include cryosurgery, electrocoagulation diathermy, and carbon dioxide laser that is used. So in what condition will you use cryosurgery? What will you look into? What parameter would you look into while deciding between cryosurgery and your carbon dioxide lasers?
Not sure.
Okay, so basically it depends on the depth. Okay, so cryosurgery, you can go up to 8 millimeters, 4 to 8 millimeters, then you can safely take up cryosurgery. With carbon dioxide laser, you can go a little more deeper. For an ectocervix lesion of around 5 mm, it can be treated. And for your endocervical, you can go up to 10 mm. Okay. Next point is your the other option besides ablative is your excisional. So would you like to enumerate the various excisional options for SIN2 and 3?
Excisional will be cold knife conization, then LEAP.
Yeah, what is the full form of LEAP?
Loop.
Electro-excision procedure.
Excision procedures.
Yeah, besides that? You can go ahead with an hysterectomy as well, right? And the carbon dioxide laser can be used as a excisional option also. So you've got LEAP and you've got something called as LLE-TZ. What is that?
Loop electro-excision of the transformation zone.
Large loop. Okay, so it has double L. Okay.
Yes.
So always remember that. So it's large loop excision of the transformation zone. Okay, so these are the various options that are available for SIN2 and 3. Right?
Okay.
Just
anything,
a few points. So patient, like Dr. Biva explained, patient on CIN may be observed. Even CIN2, you said CIN1, even CIN2, the spontaneous regression rate is more than 50% in the in 1 to 3 years. The spontaneous regression rate is more than 50% even in CIN2. That's one thing. Second, the side effects of cold knife conization and LEAP would be okay, but your cervical incompetence is more for a cold knife conization. So if you are planning, if you need to talk to the patient, and if the patient is planning for a pregnancy later on, then your better option would be LEAP over cold knife conization, because LEAP doesn't come with cervical incompetence as much as cold knife conization.
Agreed. Fine. What do you mean by cold cone, the cold knife conization or the cold cone biopsy? What do you do in that? Anyone? So basically, it's just a cone shape tissue that you're removing. Okay. So that contains both the ectocervix as well as the endocervical canal part. And you remove it en bloc so that you can avoid artifacts that are associated with the electrosurgery that you're doing. Okay, so and this helps in giving you a good margin. So the margin status assessment can be done in a much better way. We talk a lot about radical trachelectomy. So what are the structures that are actually removed in radical trachelectomy? Tanveer sir has also joined in, Dr. Riddhi. Tanveer sir,
Good evening, sir.
good evening, sir.
Good evening. Yeah. Please continue. I'm listening to you, Vibha. Okay.
So in radical trachelectomy, we remove the whole cervix, the cardinal ligament, and the uterosacral ligament, and the upper 1/3 of the vagina, with the supporting tissue around the cervix.
And parametrium?
Parametrium, yes.
Yeah.
That is
And you leave the uterine body in place. And so anything extra that you do while you're doing the radical trachelectomy?
We tie a non-absorbable circlage around the
Yeah. So where is it
cervix.
placed? So it's basically placed at the distal end of the uterine body. So it's called as a circlage, or it's also called as a pursing suture that you're taking into. Okay. What is Piver-Rutledge classification?
Piver-Rutledge is that classification for the hysterectomy. Basically, it was modified to Corlo and Morrow, probably.
Yeah,
Modified.
perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what exactly is it, Dr. Taruni? Could you explain us what are the different types of hysterectomies?
Okay, so type 1 is extrafacial or simple hysterectomy. It
Yeah.
involves removal of the uterus, cervix, with or without the ovary, the cardinal ligament,
Just
and the
one point. Okay. So in type 1, the parametria is left intact. Okay. So it is just the uterus and the cervix. Yeah. Now type 2.
Type 2 will be the modified radical hysterectomy, and in this, the upper third of the vagina is removed with lymphadenectomy is also done. And type 3 will be the Verdheim Meigs or the radical hysterectomy. And in this, again, the at least 2 to 3 centimeter upper half of the vagina is removed, and yeah, with bilateral pelvic lymphadenectomy.
Okay.
Okay.
And anyone would like to add on a little about type 4 and type 5?
Hi, sir. I'm Dr. JV. Type
Yeah.
4, extended radical hysterectomy, and type 5 is pelvic exentration.
So what do you do exactly in that? What are the different types of pelvic exentration, and in type 4, what do you do? How is type 4 different?
I think in extended radical hysterectomy, we remove till the lateral pelvic wall, if I'm not wrong. I'm not sure about the answer, sir, because I'm not very clear about that.
Okay.
Can I answer that?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. For the type 4, it is extended radical hysterectomy. So in this, we remove all of the periureteric tissue, and the
Okay.
superior vesical artery is removed, and the upper 3/4 of the vagina is removed. Okay.
Perfect.
In partial exentration is type 5. In that, we remove a portion of the distal ureter or the bladder, and the ureter is re-implanted into the bladder. So this one is basically done when it is suitable for a small central recurrence, if it
Yeah.
is there.
Yeah. So these are the 5 types. So you have to remember that. Okay. Got it? Anyone wants Dr. Taruni to repeat it again? Okay, fine.
Yeah, repeat,
Hey.
please.
Yeah, Dr. Taruni, would you like to sum it up again?
Can I add a few points to that?
Yeah,
It was
please
nicely
do.
It was very nicely explained by Dr. Taruni. So just briefly about I'm just repeating mostly, but briefly about type 1, type 2, and type 3. Then I'll be coming to type 4 and 5. So type 1, according to the Piver-Rutledge, it's type 1, 2, and 3. The Corlo-Morrow classification is A, B, and C. Indication again, the type 1 or the type A indication is mostly in the stage 1A1, like we have already explained. We have already discussed. So type 2 would be again 1A1 with LVSI and 1A2, and type 3 or C would go in, will be doing when in case of 1B1 and 1B2, and in selected 2A. Coming to the uterine cervix, so uterine cervix will be removed in all of these in 1, 2, and 3. The ovaries is the removal of ovary is optional in all of these. vaginal margin. Vaginal margin for simple extrafascial, none of the vaginal margin, none of the vagina is removed in type 1. 1 to 2 centimeter of vagina is removed in type 2, and upper 1/4 to upper 1/3 of vagina is removed in case of type 3. Okay, uterus is not mobilized in case of in case of type 1. It is tunneled through the broad ligament in case of type 2, and it is again tunneled to the broad ligament in case of type 3. The cardinal ligament.
Sorry to correct. Is it the ureter or the uterus?
Sorry, the ureters. The ureters I'm talking about, not the uterus. The ureters would be is not mobilized in, is not touched at all in type 1. Again, moving to the cardinal ligaments, it's divided at the uterine uterocervical border in case of type 1, divided where the ureter transits the broad ligament, and in case of type 2, and it is divided at the pelvic side wall in case of radical, that is 3. Uterosacral ligaments divided at the cervical border, and it is partially removed in type 2 and divided near the sacral origin at type 3. So everything is removed at the pelvic wall in case of type 3, and it is removed somewhere in the middle in case of type 2, and it is not touched at all or removed at the cervical border in type 1. That's the basic concept. The urinary bladder, it's mobilized to the base of the bladder in case of type 1, mobilized to the level of upper vagina in case of type 2, and in case of radical or type 3, mobilized to the middle of the vagina. Rectum, again, not mobilized in type 1, mobilized below cervix in type 2 and 3. Another thing is that you, if you're doing a type 1, you can very well do it in a laparoscopic or a robotic procedure, but there is no I'm not sure if robotic or laparoscopic procedures are available in type 2 and 3 or not. And coming to type 4, again type 4 is divided into D. Type 4 or type D is again divided into D1 and D2. I think type 4 was discussed perfectly. Nothing more to add in type 4 and type 5.
Sir, can you please put this list on the group, sir?
Yeah, we'll do that.
Sure.
I think
which are mobilized and which how much in each one.
Yeah, sure. Dr. Reddy will put it up.
Yeah.
Okay, a little bit about the anatomy now. Anatomy is a very commonly asked question in especially in cervix. So, Dr. Abhishek, Dr. GV, Dr. Taruni, Dr. Neelam. Okay, any one of you would you like to talk about the various peritoneal coverings that are associated with the uterus that I'm talking about? One of you answered about the peritoneal covering. The next person would talk about the contents of the parametrium. Third person will talk about the uterine supports.
Sir, peritoneal covering meaning the ligaments or?
No, how is it placed anteriorly, posteriorly, and laterally? How is the peritoneum in relation to the body of the uterus? Okay, so basically anteriorly, the peritoneal covering, it's involving the whole body of the uterus. The peritoneum is up to the bladder except the region of the cervix. Okay, posteriorly it goes up to the recto-uterine pouch. Laterally it is incomplete. It's due to the presence of the fallopian tubes. Okay, so this is the peritoneal covering that is present. Now contents of the parametrium. From where does it extend? Anyone?
It is firmly attached to the fundus and the body till the isthmus. That is that, and then it is reflected over the bladder, forming the vesico-uterine pouch.
Is it near the bladder?
Lateral pelvic wall.
Yeah, so to the lateral pelvic wall. What are the contents of the parametrium? So basically, it's the uterine artery and the ovarian ligament. You've got the various vessels, nerves, and the lymphatics that are there. Okay. Now coming to the uterine supports. Anyone who would like to talk about the primary and the secondary uterine supports?
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, there are muscular support and mechanical support. So on the muscular support, there is pelvic diaphragm, then perineal body, and the distal urethric sphincter. The mechanical supports, the ligaments come. The broad ligament, that is a double layer of peritoneum, extends from lateral margin of uterus to the lateral pelvic wall. Then there is round ligament. The third is uterosacral ligament, which extends from lower part of the uterus till the sacrum, running along the retrouteric fold, I think. Then there is a cardinal ligament, which is also called as a transverse cervical or Meckenroth's ligament. And there is pubocervical ligament. The cardinal ligament runs at the base of the broad ligaments from the cervix till the lateral pelvic wall. And the fifth is the pubocervical ligaments, from the cervix to the anteriorly pubic symphysis. Hello.
Hello.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Hello.
You're on mute. Are you there?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So you've perfectly enumerated all the uterine supports. You've got your primary, like how we used to remember it was the primary and the secondary. Okay. So first talk about the primary ones. Broad ligament comes in the secondary part. So primary is further divided into muscular and fibromuscular. So muscular are only two. You've got your perineal body and you've got your urogenital diaphragm. In the fibromuscular, you've got cardinal ligament, the uterosacral ligament, and the pubocervical ligament. And in the secondary, you've got four. You've got round ligament, the broad ligament, the ovarian ligament, and your infundibulopelvic ligament. Okay, so we used to remember the secondary ligament as BORI, B-O-R-I. So it was broad, ovarian, round, and infundibulopelvic. Primary divided into two again, muscular and fibromuscular. Muscular would be all your the strong supports, that is the perineal body, which is the amalgamation of the various muscles that are there, the perineal body, and your urogenital diaphragm. Fibromuscular, it was cardinal, uterosacral, and your pubocervical ligaments. Okay. Okay, anyone who would like to talk about the various histologies that are associated? What makes up the ectocervix and what makes up the endocervix, and what are the histopathologies that are available for CA cervix? Yeah, Dr. Garima, you can answer.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So ectocervix is lined by squamous cells, and endocervix is columnar cells, and between these there is a transformation zone.
So what exactly is the transformation zone?
Where the mucosa changes from columnar to squamous, from cervix to ectocervix and endocervix.
Okay. So this is the point for where you take the pap smear.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so basically it is the squamous epithelium which is merging with the columnar. The normal thickness is up to 10 mm, and this is a region of constant cellular activity and very sensitive to dysplasia. Okay. Yeah. Now,
Sir, is it the point where the initial cervix columnar squamocolumnar junction has changed to the newer part inside? Usually the at birth and before puberty, the squamocolumnar junction is in the endocervix, and as the exposure to hormones and pregnancy, delivery, everything, the squamocolumnar junction shifts outside ectocervix. This region is called as transformation zone.
Yeah, exactly. You summed it up perfectly. This is what it is. Okay. Now talking about the blood supply, the nerve supply, and the lymphatics. Anyone would like to volunteer? What is the blood supply of the uterus and the cervix together?
Sir,
Yeah.
the before that, can I? Sorry, blood supply. The uterine arteries are there. They arising from the anterior division of the internal iliac artery, and
Very good.
then venous drainage will be from the pampiniform plexus, or the again, which is between the layers of the broad ligament.
So basically, it's the uterine veins. Uterine veins drain into the uterine plexus, which are from the which go into the internal iliac veins. Okay.
Yes, sir.
And talking about the nerve supply, what is the
Um,
sympathetic and the parasympathetic?
Sympathetic will be T5, T6, that is the motor. T10, 11, 12, and L1 are the sensory. Parasympathetic is S2, S3, and S4. And also they are coming through the branches of the inferior hypogastric plexus.
Yes, very good. And the lymphatics now, the most important part.
Okay, so for lymphatics, basically the collecting trunks, they exit laterally from the uterine isthmus in 3 groups. So upper branches will be anterior and in the anterior and lateral cervix, they follow the uterine artery and they end in the uppermost hypogastric nodes. Then there is the middle branch, which will be to the obturator node,
Very
and the
good.
lowest will be to the inferior and superior gluteal, common iliac, presacral, and subaortic nodes. So yeah, that is. Then of course, initially it will they drain to the pelvic nodes, and then to the para-aortic nodes. That is how it goes in an orderly pattern.
Okay. Now the question is talking about the uterine lymphatics. So if you're asked about uterine lymphatics, how would you answer it? So you'll divide it into fundus, the uterine body, and the cervix, and the uterine. Then whatever you said. So this is how it'll be. So the fundus is your aortic, the aortic or your cable nodes. The body and the cervix drains into the external iliac. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Any modifications, Dr. Riddhi, that you'd like to add?
No, that's it. Just I would add one small point based on the HSCC book. Just remember the names of the regional lymph nodes. So your regional lymph nodes would be the parametrial, obturator, internal iliac, or the hypogastric, the external iliac, sacral, pisacral, common iliac, and going up to the para-aortic.
Okay. Lumbar also you include, right?
Lumbar, I don't, according to the HSCC nomenclature,
Okay.
I don't think they have included lumbar.
Fine. Okay. Now coming, Dr. Abhishek, would you like to answer what is lymphatic trapezoid?
Fletcher.
Anyone. Dr. Taruni, Dr. Garima, Dr. Neelam, anyone. Have you heard of it? Lymphatic trapezoids.
Yes, sir. It's the diagram that it's trapezoid shaped. It's used in the intracavitary brachytherapy to deliver the radiation dose to the to the common to the iliac nodes, common iliac nodes. The it the two upper and lower horizontal lines, they are at the L5S1. They're drawn from the L5S1 transverse. So I mean, I cannot explain it fully. Can you?
So okay, I'll just tell you. You first draw a line from S1, S2 to the top of the pubic symphysis. Okay. Then you draw a line from the middle of this line to the middle of L4, the anterior aspect of L4. And from the midpoint of this line, you go 6 centimeter laterally on either side. Okay, so this point corresponds to your external iliac lymph node. So basically, it is not only for ICRT, it is just to localize where the lymph nodes are.
Can you just draw it?
Dr. Riddhi, do you have your iPad?
Yeah, but these days I'm not able to connect it.
Okay. So what we'll do is, Dr. Riddhi, we'll do it tomorrow when we're discussing the locally advanced one. Okay. So I'll connect it because I have some issues now. So I've connected with phone, so I'm not able to show you the slides as well. We'll show it to you tomorrow.
If I have let me give some time to get my notes ready. Once I'm done, I will just share my screen and show you the notes once. And later
Okay.
on, we'll be sharing this. And let's continue the discussion. It will take some time. I will try to show you. Yeah, let's continue, Dr. Vijay.
Okay. So what is the someone was asking a question. Yeah.
Sir, that question about the histologies, can we?
Yeah. Talk about it's basically a question that is asked as the WHO classification. So what are the different types of cervical malignancies, the histologies that are associated?
The WHO 2014 classification.
Okay, so in want of time, we'll just give the answer. It's basically divided into squamous, which includes keratinizing as well as the non-keratinizing. You've got the baseloid, the verrucous, and the lymphoepitheliomas. The second part is your adenocarcinomas, which includes mucinous, endometrioid, clear cell, serous, and mesonephric. Third is your adenosquamous, which includes glassy cell, adenoid cystic, carcinoid, as well as the neuroendocrine tumors. Then you've got your mesenchymal that include your leiomyosarcomas and your angiosarcomas. And the last group is your the miscellaneous, which includes melanoma and your lymphomas. Okay, did you get it?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Oh, great. Yeah, excellent, Dr. Riddhi. Thank you.
Yeah. So, would you explain, Dr. Vivek, this, or should we just?
Yeah, you go ahead. Now you've drawn it, so it'll be easier.
Yeah. So at the level of L4, you draw. So you first of all you draw the central line, like Dr. Vivek said. So the central vertical line would be a line that passes through the point joining the pubic symphysis. Can you see my pointer too? The mouse pointer also you can see?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay, so the pubic symphysis to the S1, the sacral promontory basically, the S1, S2, not the sacral promontory, the S1, S2 junction. So you draw a straight line, and then from the middle of that point, you also draw a horizontal line, 5 centimeter on each side. And then you go up at the level of the L4, you draw 2 centimeter horizontal lines on each side. Now you just join them. So you join this point. This point is 2 centimeter from the central line horizontally. This point is again 5 centimeter from the central line horizontally, and then you join these two lines, and the line that the imaginary line that joins this particular point and this particular point, at the center of this you again mark a dot. So this particular point refers to the location of your para-aortic nodes. The center of this line, this particular points on either side gives you the location of your of your common iliac nodes, and then this particular point gives you the location of the external iliac nodes. Okay, so S1 at the junction of S1, S2 and the pubic symphysis, you draw a line, and from the center of this point you draw a straight line upwards to the L4. So this is the straight line you have drawn upwards, and then once you have drawn the horizontal lines from these two particular points, you just join them, and that gives you the location of the para-aortic, common iliac, and the external iliac nodes. That gives you the lymphatic trapezoid of Fletcher, and it was given by the ICRU 38. However, this is not just for ICRT. This is to locate your nodes on your X-ray.
Yeah. Perfect, Iksan.
So
Did you get it?
Riddhi, what
Try
will be
to practice it. Sorry, sir.
yeah, Riddhi, what will be the nodes? I mean, that you explain which nodes?
Yes, so the para-aortic, the common, and the external iliac nodes, sir.
Yeah, and this thing is very commonly given in the exams. Actually, they give it. It's like present in almost all the practical exams. They'll draw this and they'll give it to you, or they might just give you a pelvic X-ray and they'll ask you to draw. So what we've had told, keep practicing this, because it looks very simple, but I don't know why we tend to forget time and again. So just keep on practicing it. It takes hardly few minutes to understand, but yet I don't know why we forget that. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll continue.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Okay. So now the next question is, what are the routes of spread in cervical cancer? Okay, I'll simplify the question. What do you know about the local extension? Which all parts do you think the cervical malignancy would be extending into?
Anteriorly, it can extend to the bladder. Laterally, it can infiltrate the parametrium, and posteriorly, it can go to the uterosacral, posterolaterally to the uterosacral ligaments, and posteriorly to the rectum, and down means inferiorly to the vagina. That can be up to the lower 1/3 of the vagina, can also till that it can come. And then loco-regionally, it will go to the obturator nodes, internal iliac, external iliac, common iliac, and the para-aortic nodes. And distant metastasis through most common site is the lung.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Good brief overview. Just a second. Yeah, so basically in the local extension, it would be a good idea to go according to the most common sites. So like you said, laterally, parametrium is the most common local extension. It's around 35%. Then it goes proximally to your lower uterine segment, around 20 to 25%. Then you've got your anteriorly, don't say bladder, it is the vesicovaginal space. Okay, so vesicovaginal space for around 20% again. Then it goes posterior inferiorly into the perirectal space, that is around 15%. And opposite that, posterior superiorly, it goes to your uterosacral ligaments, and distally it can directly involve the vagina. So vagina involvement is around 5%, your uterosacral ligament involvement is around 15%. Okay. The nodes, you perfectly mentioned it out. Would you again just enumerate the stage wise, what is the involvement of the lymph nodes, the pelvic lymph nodes and your para-aortic lymph nodes?
3C1 and 3C2.
Can you come again? No. See, that is what you're talking about, the staging. So
Yes.
according to the stage, what is the lymph node involvement that is there? So stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. Okay, so the staging, if you see 3C1 and 3C2, that is according to your clinical examination and the findings that you've done. Even your imaging is not very sensitive. So for stage 1, the thumb rule that we used to follow, sir, even if you could just add, the thumb rule that we used to follow was 15, 30, 45, and 60. So stage 1 around 15%, stage 2 was 30%, stage 3 was 45%, and stage 4 was 60% for the pelvic lymph nodes. And for your para-aortic, it was 5, 15, 30, and 40. So para-aortic less than 5% is your stage 1, 15% is your stage 2, 30% is stage 3, and 40% is your stage 4. So this is how we used to remember it.
Absolutely. It's like a mathematical, we just used to mug up, and this is the way we have remembered. Absolutely right.
Yeah. So Dr. Taruni, your doubt that was there, 3C1 and 3C2. So whenever you're doing your clinical examination and supplementing with the imaging, so it's not 100% accurate. So what happens is you do get pelvic lymph nodes which are involved. Okay, so this is what the percentage is. So you can imagine like 5% is 15% is too less a number. If 100 patients of stage 1 you get, and only 15 will be missing out, and you will be getting the lymph nodes. Okay, so don't read too much into 3C1, 3C2, because the staging that has involved the lymph nodes, it still is a little bit of a dilemma, because it's not been validated as per the lymph node status that is coming into picture, because there are cases where you've got 1B and there has been one node that is positive and that directly you stage it as 3C. So just don't get into that controversy right now.
Also,
Okay,
just
sir.
think of it this way, like initially, do you remember in today's discussion when we were discussing about the treatment part, Dr. Bivai kept on saying that you need to do the pelvic lymph node dissection. Even Dr. Taruni, you mentioned that in case of stage 1, 1A1, whenever you are doing 1A1 with LVSI, 1A2, 1B1, 2A1, Dr. Bivai and Dr. Taruni kept on discussing that you along with the modified radical hysterectomy or trachelectomy, you also need to go ahead with the pelvic lymph nodal dissection. The reason being that even though clinically you don't have a node, there are chances of micrometastasis in this lymph node. So you need to actually take out the node and not rely on your clinical N0 status.
Sir,
Right.
and the para-aortic lymph node sampling as well.
Yes. Para-aortic lymph node sampling too. That's what Dr. Bivai said, that even in an early stage you have 5% chances of the metastasis to the para-aortic lymph node, and that is where the concept of the para-aortic lymph node comes from. That even if it's a 1B1, you need to go ahead and take out your para-aortic lymph nodes.
Okay, sir, understood.
Can you please repeat the roots of spread percentages that you told?
Okay, so basically the most common is your parametrium laterally, it is around 35%. Then comes proximally to your lower uterine segment, which is around 20 to 25%. Then you've got your the vesicovaginal space, that is anteriorly around 20 to 25% again. Then you've got your perirectal space, which is posterior inferiorly, that is 15%. And again, just opposite to that, posterior superiorly, it goes into your uterosacral ligament, 15%, and distally to your vagina, that is around 5 to 10%. Okay, distal metastasis, it goes through your venous plexus and your paracervical veins. It results in your hematogenous spread. Like someone had answered, the most common sites are your lung, then you've got your liver, you've got lung, bone, and the liver. Okay. In the bone, it is your thoracolumbar region that is the most common. Okay, next question is, what are the prognostic and the predictive factors that are associated? I would like you to divide it into three: patient-related, medical factors, and tumor-related. Anyone would like to answer? Okay.
Hello.
So,
yes,
yeah.
sir. The patient-related would be anemia, socioeconomic status. Then the tumor-related will be the stage, grade, LVSI, PNI, etc. Lymph nodes. That would prognostic
Okay, so
factors.
patient-related is related to the patient itself. Okay, so remember three things. Patient-related would be the age, the race, and the performance status. The medical factors would include anemia or tumor hypoxia, immunosuppression in the form of HIV or any other immunosuppressive diseases that are there, and third is malnutrition. The tumor-related includes tumor stage, the lymph node involvement, the histology, depth of invasion, LVSI present, and HPV subtypes. Okay. So I'll repeat it. Patient-related are age, race, and the performance status. The medical factors include anemia and tumor hypoxia, immunosuppression, and malnutrition. And tumor-related includes tumor stage, the lymph node involvement, histology, the DOI, that is depth of invasion, LVSI, and your HPV subtypes. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Fine.
Yeah. Also, just remember, whenever you are asked this question about the prognostic factors, like be it in a theory or in a viva, just even if you don't know the answer properly, just try to answer it in this way. Patient-related factors, treatment-related factors, tumor-related factors, other medical factors.
Okay.
Hello? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now, so we've discussed the various treatment modalities and what are the treatment options that are available, and all that. So just a little bit about the literature. You don't have much of literature in early. Which was
Before,
the trial?
Dr. Viva, I'm sorry to interrupt. Before we move forward, just I think since we have discussed about the management of CIN also, there was one part that I did not mention about in the screening part, and I know it becomes haphazard going back to the screening part, which I just remembered. So can we just briefly discuss about? So we talked about in the screening part. We talked about the FOXI and the American guidelines. We know that. In India, we started from the age of 25. In American guidelines, we started from the age of 21. And you have the options of co-testing. You have the options of HPV testing only. You also have the option of cytology. Just a small point about what if it comes to be positive. You know, whenever you're doing a screening, the patient comes to be HPV positive. What your next step should be. Just a small point on that. So you're doing a co-testing, or you're doing a just HPV testing for the patient and in screening, and the patient is turned out to be HPV positive. So would you treat that? How do you treat that? How do you go ahead with about the screening? The answer is that you need to, if the patient is HPV positive, then you need to do three things. You need to check. You need to do visual inspection under acetic acid, or you can get your cytology done and check if there is ascus or anything more than ascus or less than it, or you can go ahead with doing a HPV genotyping, 16 or 18 genotyping. So if you're going ahead with HPV genotyping, then your HPV genotype either comes positive or negative. So you should go ahead with, if it comes out to be positive, then you're supposed to go ahead with colposcopy and biopsy. So just HPV positive, you're not supposed to do colposcopy or biopsy. Even if the genotype comes positive, then only you're supposed to go ahead with colposcopy or biopsy. Similarly, if you're following up a HPV test, positive HPV with the cytology, you are not supposed to do colposcopy and biopsy unless and until your cytology comes out to be anything more than equal to ascus. So anything more than equal to ascus, you can go ahead with the colposcopy and biopsy. Otherwise, you just repeat the HPV after 1 year. Similarly, even if in case of the VIA, visual inspection under acetic acid, if you don't see anything under VIA, you can repeat the HPV testing after 1 year. Or else go ahead with colposcopy and biopsy. Once you go ahead with colposcopy and biopsy, if everything comes out to be normal, you again repeat HPV after 1 year. And if it comes out to be negative, then if it comes out to be abnormal, then it can either be a CIN, or it can be cervical cancer. So there your management would be what your management would be. I've already discussed, if it comes out to be CIN or if it comes out to be cervical cancer. But unless and until that is there, so even if your colposcopy biopsy comes out to be normal, or your VIA or cytology or HPV comes out to be negative, so HPV comes out to be negative, genotyping comes out to be negative, or your cytology comes out to be less than ascus, or your VIA you don't see anything, you're supposed to repeat your HPV after 1 year. And if even after 1 year, if your HPV comes out to be positive, you can go ahead with a colposcopy or biopsy again. Otherwise, you return to if it's negative after 1 year HPV, then you return to the 5-year screening program. So again, you go back to the screening every 5 years. Okay.
Yeah. You must have discussed about the colposcopy indications and everything, right? The indications for colposcopy, when do you do it, and the modified read index and everything.
No, I haven't.
No, sir.
Okay, so do we do a short session, just a short session on what are the different types of the indications associated with colposcopy, and also what VIM and VILI and VIA is?
Yes, sir. Please, sir.
Okay, so first, anyone would like to enumerate the various indications for colposcopy? Okay, what I'll do is I'll just briefly tell you about what colposcope and what are the various indications associated. So colposcope, like Dr. Riddhi beautifully explained, it's a positive screening test. It's to verify the presence, the extent, and the type of the pre-cancer or the cancer that is present. It gives you the advantage that you can take guided biopsies from the suspicious areas. Okay, and it also helps decide between cryotherapy and LEAP. So the indications for colposcopy, they include suspicious looking cervix, the invasive carcinoma on cytology, if you've got SIN2 or 3 on cytology, persisting SIN1 that is more than 12 to 18 months. If you've got a cytology which is unsatisfactory quality, also, if it is like Dr. Riddhi pointed out, HPV infection, you go ahead and do a colposcopy. Also, if it is VIA, VIAM, or VILI positive. So these are the various indications that are associated. So the diagnosis on colposcopy, what do you actually look for? So you've got something called as the modified Reed index. So the parameters that you look into include the acetowhitening intensity. Basically, you're looking at the VIA. So in that, the intensity is looked into. You look into the margins or the surface contour of the acetowhite areas, also the various vascular features, and the color changes after iodine application. So the advantage of colposcopy, it's easy and immediate results you're getting. It's a diagnostic test more than a positive screening test. You get you can store the photographs, so it gives you a permanent record. Unlike the other tests that are there, the other screening test, you can actually determine the site and the extent of the disease. It also helps you to differentiate between the inflammatory atypia and the neoplasia. This test also actually reduces the unwanted or the unnecessary pap smears or the biopsies or even conization and hysterectomy for that matter. So these are the various advantages associated with colposcopy. However, the limitations include it's quite expensive. The parts and all, they need frequent maintenance, so it increases the cost. Also, you need faculties who are very well trained, and so special training is required. And you actually have to rely on the biopsy. Without the biopsy, the colposcopy alone is not very suitable. So these are the various limitations that are associated. Next, when you come to VIA and VIAM and VILI, just a brief about it. VIA, Dr. Riddhi, you're saying something? Hello?
No. Please continue.
Yeah. So basically, VIA, you're using 5% acetic acid. It's used during, you can use it during colposcopy also, like we discussed. So basically, you get the acetowhite areas in the abnormal transformation zone. What happens is you get areas of increased cellular density with increased abnormal nuclei and DNA content. So what the acetic acid does is it coagulates the protein of the nucleus and the cytoplasm. So that is why you get a opaque protein and which is white in color. There is dehydration of the cells, and that reduces the cytoplasmic volume and thus increasing the reflection. And so you get a very shiny white pattern. VIAM, it's the M that is there is the magnification. So the magnification is in the tune of 2.5 to 4 times. Okay, so it's more sensitive and specific than your VIA alone. The sensitivity is in the tune of 80% and your specificity is close to 95%. Okay. The next thing is your visual inspection with Lugol's iodine. This is also called as the Schiller's test. Okay, so the advantage is yeah, anyone, someone actually was talking. Any doubt?
Specificity of VIM.
Yeah, so sensitivity is 80%, specificity is 95%. Okay. Yeah, so the limitations that are there with VIA and VIM is that you cannot use it during the menstrual phase when the patient is actually having her the menstrual bleed that is there. So the VILI, it can be used anytime during the menstrual cycle. Also, if you look at VIA and VIM, you have to do it at least 2 to 3 weeks after postpartum. So VILI gives you that advantage. You can use it anytime during the pregnancy and immediately even after the postpartum that is there. So how does Lugol's iodine actually help? So Lugol's iodine, what happens is it's glycophilic. In the glycophilic areas, that is the glycogen containing tissue. It stains the malignancy brown or black. Okay, and in the areas which are glycogen poor, you get that mustard yellow or the saffron appearance. Okay, so the glycophilic areas would be your squamous epithelium, the squamous metaplasia, and the glycogen poor areas are your the columnar epithelium or your syn, the leukoplakia or the condylomatas that are present. The VILI, the specificity is less than VIAM. It's in the tune of 85%. However, it is more sensitive. So, like we know, the screening test, if you see, it needs to be more sensitive. So, VILI is more preferred. The sensitivity is close to 90% with VILI. However, even though it is a simple or a low-cost test, it can be done by the nurses or the midwives themselves, and you get immediate results. There are a few limitations. The specificity, like we discussed, it's less than VIAM. It's just 85%. It's moderate specificity. Also, you need training, but yeah, the Lugol's iodine, the disadvantage is it stains the undergarment. So that is one of the limitations associated. Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very nicely explained,
Good.
Doctor. Yeah. So
Just one last point on the conventional PAP. The sensitivity is 50% and specificity is very high. It's around 98%. And the common question that is asked in the practicals is the precaution that you need to take. So basically, you have to remember that sexual abstinence should be there for at least 24 hours. And the patient should not have used any vaginal douche or any medication for 48 hours. No lubrication or any powder or any pelvic examination that must be done for the last 24 hours. Like I said, it cannot be collected during menstruation, and also after postpartum, it should be done at least like 3 to 6 weeks later. There is a very common photograph that is placed. So the instruments that are used with the conventional pap smears is your Cusco speculum. There is an Ayers spatula. So from the ectocervix, you use your Ayers spatula, and from the endocervical canal, you use a cytobrush or a cotton tip swab. So three things that you have to remember, three instruments that are associated. One is the Cusco speculum, the others is your Ayers spatula, and you've got your cytobrush or your cotton tipped swab. Okay, so these are the various screening methods.
The sensitivity and specificity of PAP.
Sensitivity is 50%, specificity is close to 98%. Yeah. And yeah, one more point, the limitations that are there, it has, like we discussed, sensitivity is moderate to low. You require complex infrastructures to actually have, you have to take a PAP and then you have to examine it. So you need good infrastructure for that. You need trained cytologists. The patient would require multiple visits. You don't get immediate results. You have to wait for at least 1 or 2 days. It's less accurate in the post-menopausal females. Location of the lesion becomes very difficult. You just know it's either positive or it's negative, but you don't know where the lesion is exactly. And you need continuous monitoring of the patients also if it's suspicious. So these are the various limitations associated with PAP. Yeah, so we'll continue, Dr. Riddhi.
Yeah, let's continue.
Okay. Anything, Tanvi sir, if you would like to add? Dr. Riddhi, we'll move to the evidence then. I think there's nothing else that needs to be discussed related to this thing.
Can we?
Okay.
With this, yeah.
No, sorry. You continue.
Yeah. Just a brief about about carcinoma cervix in pregnancy, because this question has also come. Would you like to
Yeah.
take that? Or?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so this question has also been asked in DNP and all. You might get asked in practicals also. So if a carcinoma cervix and pregnancy. So if the patient is pregnant, what you're supposed to do? So in case of a carcinoma in situ, if it's not an invasive cancer, you confirm it with colposcopy and then just go ahead with conservative management and do a monthly pap smear. And until and unless the pregnancy reaches to full term, you can consider for conization. Yeah, and if it's an invasive cancer, it again the treatment based on is again based on the tumor size, stage, patient's age, desire of the patient to keep the pregnancy. So you need to keep in mind all these factors. If it's the stage of the disease, obviously you need to keep in mind. At the same time, the age of the patient and the desire of the patient to continue uh, the pregnancy. But again, your treatment management, or for that matter, if you should treat or not, would depend again on the on the pregnancies. If it's an early pregnancy, if it's less than 6 months, the ideal option would be to abort the pregnancy in the first 6 months, and you can use you can use misoprostol or evacuation, and then go ahead with a definitive treatment, either surgery or radiation. And if the patient refuses for abortion, here again comes before going to refusal of abortion. So here again it comes the question of if the patient does want to keep does want to get like keep the fertility or not. Again, it would, if it's an early disease, you will discuss the options of uh, uh, fertility sparing surgery after you have done an abortion. And if the patient refuses for abortion, your option would be to do a serial MRI scan, and MRI scan every 2 to 3 months interval, and you may consider for a neoadjuvant chemotherapy in this case, because obviously you won't be able to treat it with surgery or radiation. But then again, these decisions will again will be dependent on the stage of the disease and the age of the patient. For mid pregnancy, you can consider a continual of pregnancy, and you may treat with neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Options would be paclitaxel cisplatin, is as much as I could find in the literature. And for a late pregnancy, again, you should let the patient continue the pregnancy. Serial MRI can be done, and postpartum, you're supposed to go for the radical hysterectomy with lymph node dissection. Based on this again depends on the stage of the disease. So you start your treatment after the patient has given birth. While discussing, you need to keep in mind you need to keep in mind, we need to discuss with the patient about permanent loss of reproductive capability, and again you need to talk about the about the survival of, I mean, the prognosis of the disease while discussing with the patient. If you have to convince a patient regarding abortion, you obviously need to discuss about the survival of the patient based on the stage of the cancer, and let the patient decide about medical termination of pregnancy.
Yeah. Okay. Perfectly put, Dr. Riddhi. You explained it well. Next point is what is Sedley's criteria and what is the Peters criteria? Anyone would want to take it?
Peters criteria is positive parametrium, positive margin, and positive nodes for concurrent chemoradiation. And when this Peters criteria is all negative, then we apply the Sedley's criteria, where we have to opt in for radiation based on LVSI, deep stromal invasion, and size of the tumor. More than 4 centimeter.
LVSA, yeah, tumor size more than 4 centimeter, middle or deep, 1/3 stromal invasion. Perfect.
Permanent.
So this is for post-operative indication for adjuvant RT, Sedley's, and Peters for your addition of chemotherapy. So Peters was GOG 109 and Sedley's was GOG
902.
92.
92.
Yeah. So the last number that is there is it's 120. Okay, so you don't have to go beyond that in service. Okay.
Can you
Yeah. So now,
both Peters and Sedley's criteria?
yeah, Dr. Garima, you spoke about it, right? You can repeat it once. Okay, so Peters GOG 109, it is positive margin, parametrial involvement, and positive nodes. This is for addition of chemotherapy. And the Sedley's criteria, it is GOG 92, basically LVSI, middle or deep 1/3 stromal invasion, and tumor size more than or equal to 4 centimeter. Okay.
Yeah. So basically, if
So,
it is, yeah.
no, you continue. Continue, sir.
No, it's me, Dr. Reddy. So yeah, so if it is LVSI positive, and if the deep 1/3 is involved, you don't need to consider the size of the tumor. You would go ahead with a concurrent chemoradiation. If it's LVSI positive, in stromal invasion is all up to the middle third, then you should go ahead with concurrent chemoradiation if the tumor size is more than or equal to 2 centimeter. If only a superior 1/3 is involved in an LVSI positive case, you would go ahead with concurrent CTRT if the tumor size is more than 5 centimeter. And if it is LVSI negative, then for a middle or a deep, so middle 1/3 or deep, 1/3 invasion, you would go ahead with CTRT only if the tumor size is more than 4 centimeter. If it's superficial, you wouldn't, for LVSI negative, you wouldn't go ahead with CTRT irrespective of the tumor size. So that is essentially what Sedley's criteria is.
This is for post-op RT.
Did you guys get it?
Yeah, this is for post-op RT. The Sedley's is for post-op RT, and
Yes,
Peters
it's
is
for
for
post-op.
addition of adjuvant chemotherapy with your adjuvant radiation. Okay, so now since you know the high-risk features, that one more scenario that is actually put across is the incidentally diagnosed cervical cancer post simple hysterectomy. So how would you manage it? So basically, if it is micro-invasive disease that you've got, then no additional treatment needs to be done. But if it is an invasive disease and if it's an early stage, then you look at the lymph node assessment. Lymph nodes are fine, then you don't need to go ahead and do anything extra. If high-risk features are present, then you add your chemo radiation as per the features that are there. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you get it? Yeah. The next point is related to fertility sparing. Any idea about the criteria for performing Dargent's operation? There's a list of 9 criteria that are there. Okay, so basically in the fertility sparing surgery, that's also called as the Dargent's operation. It's a question that is asked. Basically, when the patient has a strong fertility desire, if the age is less than 40 years, it's a proven diagnosis of invasive cervical cancer, stage ranging from 1A1 to 1B1, tumor size less than 2 centimeter, limited endocervical involvement, which can be determined by colposcopy or your the other imaging, and no pelvic lymph nodes that are there or any factors for distant metastasis. And when you rule out the unfavorable histologies like we discussed, especially your neuroendocrine and your glassy cells. So yeah, and the surgery needs to be done by a good gynecological oncologist who's there. So gynec oncologist needs to do it, who has experience in laparoscopy and radical vaginal surgery. So these are the criteria for performing the fertility sparing surgery or the Dargent's operation. Okay, one more point that is asked is about the ovarian preservation. So ovaries can be shifted to region outside the irradiation field, there are three regions that are there. You've got your upper paracolic gutter and your lower paracolic gutter, and you've got your psoas fascia. Okay. Now we've talked about radiation, we've talked about surgery. So anyone who'd just quickly sum up about the okay. So someone talk about the post-op complications and the post-radiation complications.
Post-op complications includes urinary incontinence and bowel and bladder strictures, rectal incontinence.
Okay, Dr. Thirumani, the ideal way would be you divide it into intra-op and post-op and late complications. Okay, so intra-op would be you can damage the ureteric nerve, the ureter. Sorry, you can get neurological injuries and also major vessel injuries. The post-op complications would include the most common one is bladder dysfunction. Then you got urinary tract infections, inability to void urine, and surgical wound infections that are there. So these are the post-op complications. The late complications, they include urinary dysfunction, that there could be a detrusor instability or a loss of bladder sensation. You can get constipation, ischemic damage to the ureters, the ureteric injury and the strictures and the fistula development. Another common late complication is development of lymphedema and sexual dysfunction. So quality of life is also hampered, and sexual dysfunction is one of the most common ones. Okay, so these are the various the post-op complications that are there. Now talking about post-radiation complications. Anyone who'd like to talk? So the post-RT toxicities. Am I audible?
Yeah, audible, Dr. Vivek.
Yeah. So basically, the post-RT complications are divided into acute, subacute, and chronic. So anything that is less than 3 months will be acute, subacute will be anything between 3 to 6 months, and chronic will be more than 6 months. So you've got, in RT, you have to divide it according to the site. So if you look at the rectosigmoid, they are more common than the bladder toxicities. So you've got chronic tenesmus, you've got rectal ulcers, you can develop strictures. So these are the rectosigmoid complications. Then you've got your bladder toxicities. So bladder toxicities include persistent hematuria, necrosis, even rarely you can get vesicovaginal or urethrovaginal fistulas. The late small bowel sequelae, they include SAIO, that is subacute intestinal obstruction. You can also develop the perforation and the strictures that are there. Okay. Now, a brief about recurrent cervical cancers. So, suppose you've treated an early stage and again the disease has come. Okay, now I'll give you a few scenarios. Suppose if the disease is in the central pelvic region. So, what are your options for that? So basically, your treatment would actually depend upon the mode of the primary therapy that you used, the site of recurrence, the disease-free interval that is there. Anything above 6 months, then you can even consider radiation again, and also the performance status of the patient. Okay. So basically, if it is a central pelvic disease, then you can go. The option is surgery. You can go ahead with exentration. If it is involving your the bladder, then you go ahead with anterior exentration. If it is involving the rectum, you go ahead with posterior exentration. If the disease is involving the pelvic side walls, you go ahead with LEER. If there is a small volume disease limited to the cervix, then you can definitely go ahead and do a type 1 or a type 2 hysterectomy. And for metastatic disease, you can go ahead and do a palliative chemo or palliative RT. Okay, that depends on the disease status. For the central pelvic disease, yes, one of the options is MUPIT as well, but the results that are there in the trials that have been put across, especially for an early disease with the recurrence, it's usually exenteration which is more helpful rather than your MUPIT or the interstitial brachytherapy that is practiced.
Sir, can you please repeat?
Okay. So basically, your treatment, it depends upon the primary therapy that you've given, the site of recurrence that is there, the disease-free interval, and the patient's performance status. So if it is a central pelvic disease, the option is exenteration. If it is involving the bladder, you do an anterior resection, and if it is involving the rectum, it is a posterior resection that you do. Okay, the next point is if the disease is involving the pelvic side walls. So I didn't get you, Dr. SP. Definitions, I did not understand. Okay, so pardon me?
No, I'm also trying to figure out what he's asking.
Yeah. So for the pelvic side walls, if the disease is confined to that region, then you do a laterally extended endopelvic resection, or LEER, that it's called, laterally extended endopelvic resection. The next option, next scenario is if it's a small volume disease that's limited to the cervix, then you go ahead with type 1 or type 2 hysterectomy. And if it is a metastatic disease, then the intent becomes palliative chemo or palliative RT.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
I
Dr. Tirtha, we can do pap smear in pregnancy, okay? It's pap smear, it's not a contraindication. Pregnancy is not a contraindication for doing pap smear, as far as I know. 2 factors indicated, more than 2 factors. No, not more than, it's not more than 2 factors. Sedley's criteria is not more than 2 factors. It's basically all 3 factors based on what you have. So if it's LVSI positive and deep 1/3 invasion, then you wouldn't consider the tumor size. So you would give chemotherapy anyway. If it's LVSI positive middle 1/3, then you would consider the tumor size and do it only if it is more than 2 centimeter. Superficial 1/3, LVSI positive, then you have to consider. So all the 3 factors. So yeah, it has to be more than 5. That way, there is a small table in NCCN guidelines. I would be sharing that. I think that would clear your doubts. Residual versus recurrence definitions. Dr. Vivek, would you take that? Residual versus recurrence definition.
So basically, once you've completed your treatment, you've done your EBRT, and then when you assess if there is no disease, and if the disease is coming back after, like there has been a complete response, then you call it as a recurrence. Residual would be after the completion of the treatment, you did an imaging or you even did a clinical examination, and if there is anything that is present. So that'll be the definition for the residual or the recurrent disease, because this is something which is visualized. The problem actually comes in your brain tumors and the other side. So wherever you are actually seeing a response, wherever you've done a response assessment, no disease that is seen, and then it comes back, then you call it as a recurrence. Otherwise, it's a residual disease.
Yeah. So any proof of complete response, then you call it as a recurrent. If there are no proof of complete response, you haven't done any investigation, you would write it as residual/recurrent if you don't know if it's a residual or recurrent. And that is not specific to cervix only. It's overall as far as oncology is concerned.
Dr. SP, it is after the brachy, because you always do a response assessment after the completion of the treatment, and treatment is not completed until unless brachy is done.
At the end of EBRT.
Okay. Anything else, Dr. Riddhi, that you would like to add? I think everything is covered as far as early.
You wanted to talk about the evidences. So
I think we'll do it tomorrow.
We'll do
I think
tomorrow.
we'll do it tomorrow. It's 1 hour 45 minutes that we've done.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll discuss it with the late cervical malignancy, and we'll discuss about brachytherapy tomorrow. Okay.
Someone is
Hello?
asking.
Excuse me, sir. Like, I have a doubt in EBRT. Like, being APPA, what is the dose going from the AP as well as from the PA, and if it's left and right lateral?
We'll discuss this in details on Tuesday. Dr. Mansi will be teaching us the portals.
Yeah, sure, sure.
Okay, it will be actually better if we do it with the diagrams and everything. So she has actually made an excellent presentation, and so we'll do it with that.
About the dose, sir. Like, dose, what is the dose it's going from the AP as well as from the PA?
Yeah, that everything will be explained that day. So it'll be easier if, because it'll not be nice to actually like take up a question in between of a topic that has already been assigned.
Okay,
so yeah, so please attend that. We'll have a good discussion on that.
Someone asked the treatment of 1B3. Okay, so whenever like while discussing, we said that we kept on saying 1B2. So that was based on the previous classification. So whatever we used to call as 1B2 is essentially now 1B3. More than centimeter used to be 1B2, and so we talked about the discussion of the treatment of 1B2. So essentially that has become 1B3 now, more than 4 centimeter, right?
Yeah, so actually, I should have actually said 1B3. We're still not very much used to this newer classification. Actually, it is with its flaws and everything. So. Okay, so we'll meet tomorrow after Dodul sir's class. I'll put up the link, and we meet tomorrow. Thank you so much. Today morning and evening also you guys have attended. I think we've tried our best to actually incorporate whatever is asked, because cervix is a case that you will definitely get. So we've tried to put in whatever the things can be. So tomorrow will be on the advanced cases, and more on brachytherapy that we'll be discussing. Okay.
This was a very extensive and amazing discussion, Dr. Viva. I mean, all the points that you have brought out, especially about colposcopy and everything, it's a very fruitful discussion. I feel.
Yeah, and plus with you around, like it's a, what do you say? It's a symbiotic effect. In fact, I learned a lot about the hysterectomies also. So yeah, that is how it actually works. Like 2 heads are better than 1. In fact, even Tanveer sir's points in the morning and the evening, they were wonderful.
Yeah. So for the residents, I think they once the recordings are up, if you haven't gotten a chance to note down all the at least the points that we have discussed, please do note down. You know, this kind of, I mean, we never had a chance to you know, attend classes like this.
Thank you very much, sir,
discussed.
conducting these classes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Taruni. It was very well put across. The case presentation was perfect. You were answering also very well. You, Dr. Abhishek, Dr. Garima, Dr. GV, in between all those who are answering. So you guys are answering really well. Just keep the momentum. You are all set to go. Okay. So
Sure,
good night. Enjoy the remaining Sunday.
Good night.
Yeah. Good night, Dr. Riddhi. Please
good night.
convey thank you to Tanveer sir also, and please tell him to join in for melanoma and the breast discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.